I did not graduate, but I went there for a little while. When I was working on this deck yesterday, I was going over everything, and I looked at the schedule, and I realized that Vinny Lingo, my good friend, I've done some business with, is giving the exact same talk as me right now at a different stage. And so I figured I could get a bit more personal with you guys. So this may be a bit more intimate than most of the speeches you've heard today, but let's see how it goes. I also may have some trouble with this clicker. From the time I was probably 12 years old, I decided that I wanted to change the world. And I decided that I wanted to have a broad, positive social impact. I grew up in a small farm town in western Massachusetts, and the way I thought I did that was through activism or politics. First got my start in activism at Occupy Wall Street while in college. Went there for months protesting bank malfeasance, government inaction. And one thing that I learned through that experience was that demanding action does not affect it. And so I went into politics. I worked for the governor of Massachusetts, and then I ran the campaign of the woman who is now Attorney General of Massachusetts. And guess what I learned? Politics is broken too. Between bureaucracy and the role of money in our elections, somebody in their 20s has no capacity to affect change. And so for the next few months, this was in the fall of 2013, I experienced a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to make an impact. And I transferred to the University of Michigan. There, I met a young Bitcoin entrepreneur named Kennard Hockenhall. He was from the inner city of Detroit. His family had their house foreclosed upon during the Great Recession, and he was the most ardent Bitcoin enthusiast you'll ever meet. He was convinced that Bitcoin was a solution to many of society's problems. It reduced the need for governments, for banks, for the people that had screwed his family over. And while I empathized with him, I came from a very liberal background, and I thought government was good. And even though I had been disillusioned with politics, something like Bitcoin seemed kind of anarchistic to me. But I started to learn about the technology, and he convinced me to join the University of Michigan Bitcoin meetup. And at that meetup, I was approached by a reporter from USA Today, my very first meetup. She's asking us questions, the head of the club and I, asking us questions about Bitcoin and about our organization. I don't contribute much. But she mentions there are Bitcoin clubs at MIT and Stanford. And right then, the politician in me was just triggered. I just saw this organizing opportunity, got on the call with the heads of the MIT and Stanford clubs, said, why don't we create an organization? A month later, what is now known as Blockchain Education Network was born. Didn't really think much of it at the time, but I began my trek down this rabbit hole. And that led to my next major realization, and probably the most profound one when it comes to understanding this technology, is that Bitcoin is a money protocol, something that has been missing from the infrastructure of the World Wide Web. Blockchains as a whole are value protocols. And what this means is, if you think about the advent of the World Wide Web, is that it allowed it created an extraordinary conduit for the exchange of information and the dissemination of it. Thus, much of humanity's knowledge has been uploaded to the internet. However, if you want to exchange value online, no conduit existed before 2009 that allowed for the exchange of value, whether that's IP, money, real estate, in a way that is as frictionless as sending an email. That, in essence, is what Bitcoin and blockchain technology affords. And it was with that understanding that I began to get more excited about this technology. Little did I know when I founded this nonprofit group that was a hodgepodge of Bitcoin clubs around the United States of what it would become. You see, right when I founded the organization, Mt. Gox, the world's largest Bitcoin exchange in the world, imploded. And all of a sudden, pretty much everyone in the world had heard about Bitcoin, if just for a moment. and lots of college students around the world began to become excited about this tech. And before I knew it, we had 100 chapters in 20 plus countries on every habitable continent. And we had this student movement underway. One of the first chapters we started was actually in Sierra Leone, and this was during the Ebola outbreak. And we tried to work with these students using Bitcoin to send them money so they could buy sanitary goods and help combat the outbreak. This was one of our first learning lessons with Bitcoin. Well, we could send money to these young men and women. There was no off-ramp for them. And unfortunately in Sierra Leone, you can't buy things with Bitcoin, especially during an Ebola outbreak. So we learned about the limitations in this experience. Another thing I learned during this time that was really important was going to Bitcoin conferences, speaking to fairly large audiences, smaller than this, but still fairly well-sized, because the only people that were interested in Bitcoin at this time were white people. It was like white, middle-class, middle-aged, anarchistic men. It was like the most limiting demographic you could imagine. It was like, how are we supposed to have decentralized money if only these nerds in their parents' basement are using it? It wasn't a very compelling technology, despite the potential applications. And it made me realize how essential this nonprofit organization actually was. Bringing people of color, bringing women into this industry, bringing young people, bringing old people. Right then, back in 2014, that wasn't apparent to most people in the industry. The more I learned, the more excited I got, however. 4 billion people in the world do not have access to traditional financial services, and just less than half of them have no access to financial services whatsoever. Bitcoin and blockchain technology inherently enables anybody with a phone to have a bank account in their pocket. That is a very, very powerful innovation. When there are 2 billion people in the world that are only storing money under their bed or behind their walls. This allows for greater security, greater portability. If you're someone fleeing Syria, it allows you to take your wealth with you. This technology has massive potential. The biggest breakthrough in my time in this industry was the introduction of Aetherium, which was a new sort of blockchain. Bitcoin was a protocol for a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Aetherium is a blockchain for smart contracts or decentralized applications, which broadens the potential for this technology exponentially. Decentralized money is cool. I think it's actually one of the best use cases for this tech, or even just decentralized digital gold. But with Ethereum and decentralized applications, we can have smart property. We can have dynamic real estate transfers. Individuals can own their healthcare data for the first time. The applications became really endless to me. And this led me to start my first company called Augur. Augur is a decentralized prediction market platform built on top of the Ethereum blockchain. Effectively, it's an unstoppable online betting platform that predicts the future. What this enabled is a global, limitless derivatives market. Let's say I want to provide crop insurance to someone in Latin America that has never had access to that sort of tool before. With Augur, I can create a contract that enables me to bet on the future rainfall in a certain region of Argentina, and farmers there now can have a hedge against their crops. This was a powerful tool, and it's probably one of my proudest accomplishments. After we did one of the very first ICOs ever, about 2.5, 3 years ago, there were 3 years of coding left, and I wasn't a coder. So I went on to my next step, which was as a venture capitalist. I joined Blockchain Capital, which already had a fairly respectable portfolio when I joined the firm. However, as I saw the entrepreneurs that came through our door, there was a trend I realized that we were somewhat responsible for. When we had folks that maybe didn't look like ourselves or came from different walks of life, or had a pitch that explored a problem that we couldn't really relate to, it was very hard for us to invest in that company or take that pitch seriously. And this is something that plagues all of venture capital. The difference is, with blockchain technology, blockchains are social movements before they're technologies. And they follow Metcalfe's law. They're only as powerful as the number of members in the network. And when we're only enabling entrepreneurs that look like ourselves, that have stories similar to our own, what we do is we limit that network effect. And we fundamentally inhibit the growth of this technology. And there's a certain short-termism that comes with that view because we live in an increasingly globalized world. And thus, when we act with short-termism, that has ripple effects. So let's talk about blockchain technology today. It's a blockchain bonanza. Everyone's talking about blockchains. Crypto is hot. You can't read even Teen Vogue without reading about Bitcoin. This is a very popular topic right now. And we actually have seen extraordinary growth from many companies. Revenue is up, customers are up, ICOs are outpacing all internet angel and seed round venture investment. And there's 5 new ICOs a day, these initial coin offerings, mostly for garbage. But it's still fascinating to see the democratization of fundraising occurring before our very eyes. Part of this trend is a culture of greed and short-sightedness. Even I'm in this article right here, have been featured in these articles that are talking about these Bitcoin millionaires, these people getting incredibly wealthy. And it's just missing the narrative. Every single ad you see online has some crypto guru, or you see memes with Lambos. And the question you have to ask when this is what's being focused on in an industry is, to what end? It's, what is this all for? Because in the short term, it may be great, and we may be celebrating with the wealth being created. But in the long term, we existentially threaten the potential of this technology by being plagued by this greed. And the fact is, Bitcoin is not a money protocol for the web today. I mean, how many people in this room own Bitcoin? How many of you use it regularly? Yeah, not many. And you're probably buying drugs with it, which is one of the original use cases. It actually has not developed in a substantial way because we're focused on the short term. There's not a single crypto asset that's easy to use. This is not a tool today for the unbanked, although you read stories about people pouring their life savings into Bitcoin, which is mildly alarming. Blockchain-based voting, all these use cases that we've been flouting for almost half a decade now are just getting started today. And there are virtually no technologies that actually are touching our lives regularly. And to me, that's kind of concerning, given how much crypto assets have appreciated. But at the same time, it presents an extraordinary opportunity for investment. It's something I think about all the time. Because we've invested with such short-termism, a lot of the more longitudinal opportunities that exist in this space have gone very much unexplored. And so there are 3 catalysts, and I'm just going to put this down because I keep on changing the slides by mistake. But there are 3 catalysts for change through blockchain technology. The first way to think about this is through the foundational technology, the protocols. Well, those are Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, Stellar, Litecoin. These are revolutionary protocols because if you look at the first iterations of the web, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, their problem is that there was no incentive to maintain or improve the protocols. I have no explanation for that. Anyway, these protocols provide an incentive layer for innovation at the back end of a protocol. Today, most of the web is maintained by volunteers. that are underfunded and understaffed, and that's why the internet still kind of sucks 30 years later. The fact is, in Web 3.0, with these protocol-based tokens, whether they're Bitcoin or Ether or Litecoin or XRP, you actually have an incentive to maintain the protocols that folks are building technologies on top of. Furthermore, what makes these protocols so incredibly valuable is that all the applications, all the Ubers, Googles, Airbnbs that are built on top of these protocols, the value that those applications capture trickles down to the protocol tokens and protocol layers. It leads to the realignment of incentives throughout the stack, which we've never actually really had before in software development. Then there are these companies that are going and building this infrastructure, building gutting for large corporations and entities and governments. There's a company such as Parity Technologies, which is one of my portfolio companies. And Parity, what they do is a great example is they worked with the UN World Food Program to provide the infrastructure for money-based food payments for Syrian refugees. And that sort of foundational technology has only begun to be explored. Wallets are a great example of this. And then it gets really exciting. There's empowerment. We spoke before about how Bitcoin and crypto assets allow you to have a bank account in your pocket. But financial inclusion extends far beyond that. If you think about digital rights to music, if you're an artist and you're creating music, your payments go through this horrible organization known as ASCAP. And every few months you get a check in the mail for a random amount of money and you have no idea where it came from. It's from your streaming and royalties. In theory, with blockchain technology, you have the capacity to track payments and monetization of any intellectual property or music or content you put online in real time and get paid for it that way. STEM is a great company that does this and is working with some of the top artists in the world. Then there's digital identity. The World Wide Web is littered with hundreds of millions of dollars of failed startups that have tried to tackle this issue. The largest corporations have tried to solve it, but the problem is that until you have provable digital scarcity, which is what Bitcoin introduced, the whole concept of a digital identity was untenable because you could not actually prove that some string of characters was actually attached to someone's identity. This is a problem that's being solved today. It has a huge ramifications for refugees, people that are immigrants, people that don't have access to the historical forms of identification. Then there's privacy. The reality is we live in a growingly Orwellian world. And blockchain technology, in many ways, has the capacity to be the antidote to that. Whether it's allowing you to truly own your own money, or whether it's to browse the internet safely using a platform like Orchid or what Telegram's trying to build. If you think about healthcare records, and this is one of the craziest things in the world to me, the only person in the whole healthcare stream that doesn't have access to patient data today is the patient. I mean, that's just insane. And with blockchain technology, we have the capacity to give the rights to people's data, whether it's healthcare data or beyond, back to the individual. Blockchains, in theory, are a tool for sovereignty in the digital age. We don't have many of those. Don't expect Congress to protect you. These are tools that we have to build ourselves, and these are tools that we have to adopt ourselves. I don't think any organization, any large corporation, government, or bank really wants you to be sovereign online. And that's scary because we live our lives online. And so this is a very important development coming from this tech. Lastly, there's realignment. Realignment has to do with applications that really already exist in the world. Supply chain. IBM came out with a great report 2 days ago about how they've been doing this supply chain trial with Walmart. And they were tracking mangoes for Walmart. and inevitably some mangoes went bad. Historically, when stores have bad mango or any other product, what happens is that they have to go through the whole provenance of the items, track the stores, and on average it takes about 6 days. With this mango trial, it took 2 minutes. We have the opportunity to make supply chains more transparent. We'll never have items get lost in the mail again, and if we do, we'll know where they get lost, and we'll be able to audit any sort of supply chain transaction that's happened in the past, because blockchains and the data inputted to them are immutable. Then there's energy. Today's grid is broken. If you have a solar on your roof and you are selling it back to the grid, it often costs the grid, or pretty much 60% of all energy you sell back is lost going back to the power plant. With blockchain technology, we have the capacity to have microgrids in which neighborhoods can consolidate energy grids, and you can sell directly to your neighbors in a very streamless manner. And just make the whole process of buying and selling energy much more efficient. In government, the applications are limitless, whether it's voting, accountability. One of the problems that people have said about voting online is that you can't prove a person's identity. Well, if we figure out this identity solution using blockchain technology, all of a sudden you can increase civic engagement, voter engagement for corporate boards, and thus forth using blockchains and blockchain-based mechanisms. And so this is the thesis behind the fund that I'm launching. And this isn't a pitch, but, well, I guess it is a pitch. But pretty much, I was looking at the 150 new hedge funds being launched. And I've seen too many of their decks to count. But they're all focused on these short-term gains, the upside of crypto assets. You don't ever hear them talk about entrepreneurs or developers or the people actually building these technologies. It's all a bunch of financial calculations. And the problem is that this isn't gold in the ground where you can calculate how much is there and run a bunch of estimates. This is people building open source software, open source value. And if you aren't working with the people going and building this technology and understanding where they're coming from, you're going to lose a lot of money eventually. And so we take a view that we should work with our entrepreneurs. We should empower them. We should find entrepreneurs from all around the world, not just from the United States or Silicon Valley, but the sorts of folks that understand the problems that face their businesses and their communities, and enable them and try to tackle those problems in a holistic manner. I'm incredibly proud to say that my co-founder is a Latina woman, first Latina VC in Silicon Valley, total badass, Barbara Manuzzi, she's here. You guys should give her a little applause. It's not easy to be a woman in Silicon Valley. It's definitely not easy to be a woman VC, and she is a total badass. She brings a point of view that you don't normally have in a venture capital office. I went down to Brazil and I met all of her colleagues, and seeing where she comes from and understanding where other people come from is so incredibly important. But I don't think investors do that nearly enough. And when you're building blockchain technology, which is, like I said, a social movement before it's a technology, you have to think about the world as a whole, not just the world you live in. Thank you. Do I have time for Q&A? I've got time for some questions.
Yes. Hello. Okay. Yeah, my name is Jamari. Go ahead, remember Jamar goes so far in his Ferrari. Really, you talk a lot about Bitcoin, and we know we have Ethereum now. But I am curious about, do you feel like for the long term, the monetary policy and structure of Bitcoin can still serve the needs of what you're kind of talking about in regards to impact?
Probably not. I think Bitcoin, unfortunately, has become much more of a digital gold than a digital money. I've got Basecoin right there, who I'm an advisor to. They're an algorithmic stablecoin that maintains parity with the US dollar. And I'm pretty convinced at this point that the only way you have a transactional cryptocurrency is one that is stable. I don't think the volatility of even gold, which is a $7 trillion asset, is actually manageable for most consumers. So no, it will be a different crypto asset that consumers end up using. But as digital gold, it's great.
Yeah, I just had a question in relation to cryptocurrency and its evolution. So with cryptocurrency, how do you see it evolving? Because there's like approximately like 2,000 different types of cryptos, and they're all going into different types of markets, and they're all searching for like different use cases for companies. So do you see the future, like say 20, 30 years down the line, do you think there will be still 1,000 different cryptos serving different companies, and then they'll all be tokenized already, or do you see there's only a couple left?
I hope not. I mean, that just sounds like, it sounds so retrogressive, having to have different tokens for every different like service that you use. There may be a service that makes all these different tokens more frictionless, but if I have to have like 1,000 different credit cards, it's like, oh, that's just a horrible world to live in. But more importantly, I'd say forget the term cryptocurrency. As I just said before, these volatile assets are not good currencies. Unless it is stable, and somehow, there are ways to do this algorithmically or with tethering, there is no way on earth that most consumers are ever going to adopt means of payments that don't maintain the same value day in and day out. So think about them as crypto assets. Payment tokens are crap. Just forget about them. They're not going to exist in a while. The way to think about crypto assets as a whole is I'd say there will probably be somewhere between 6 to 12 protocols, blockchains. So, and then you'll have some sort of meta protocols like Polkadot and Aeon, which allow interoperability between blockchains. And then lastly, you will have tokens such as Augurs where they actually make the application work. But I'm not sold on the vast majority of these utility tokens. Only utility tokens that actually provide utility are particularly interesting. And then lastly, the largest crypto asset, and probably under 3 years, will be security tokens. Tokens that represent either real estate in the real world, anything that's scarce in the real world, whether it's equity in a company, shared in a limited partner interest in a venture fund. You can literally tokenize everything. You have to recognize it's a security, not a utility.
Just in relation to crypto in general, economically speaking, even though it might not be practical to have 100, of course it won't be practical, but wouldn't it be economically efficient to have these hundreds of tokens or cryptos in general to meet the different types of consumer markets in general, or is that not applicable?
It's kind of like saying, wouldn't it be great if you had a gift card for every store you walked into? It's like, no. We should just like all use Bitcoin or Ether. Like it's like if you're built on top of a blockchain, use its native token. Like there's really no reason for these people to be issuing all their own tokens. There are exceptions. Like Augur is a great exception where you actually need Augur's token to make the application work in a decentralized manner. The vast majority of these tokens do not operate that way. Sure.
Okay. Did you say you invested in Parity as well, or?
Yes.
Okay. Didn't they make some mistake?
Startups.
Oh, okay. That's all.